Over 95% of applicants get rejected on the basis of their resume alone, which means it's really important to nail this step. But what actually makes an amazing resume? Over the last 2 years, I've personally obsessed with what a perfect resume looks like. I analyzed every previous resume of mine that made it past the resume screen and reviewed 348 resumes from other computer science students over on my LinkedIn profile. I soon started to realize what actually mattered. And in this video, I'll share that exact framework that I discovered, which helped me land offers from some of the biggest names in tech. Hey, if you don't know who I am, my name is Mark Benliyan, and within 18 months of learning to code, I did 6 software engineering internships at companies like Figma, Netflix, NASA, and Tinder. And on this channel, my goal is to help students land their dream software engineering jobs. The first crucial component that you need to understand here is that your resume is not just about listing your experiences. Instead, it's about conveying a compelling message of who it is that you are. And the best resumes will lean further into the compelling message and crafting of the story rather than just trying to ace getting all of your experiences on the paper. When a recruiter reads my resume, they should understand the story of who Mark Benliyan is. This includes what have I done in the past, how I've progressed over time, and maybe even what some of my interests actually look like. That's not to say that you need to explicitly state those interests, but it should give a sort of character profile of you as a candidate. And if you really want to know the secret to cracking particularly unique companies, it really does boil down from having a story painted in your resume that matches the type of character or personality that they're looking to fill into their role. Stick around until later in the video where I'll talk about how to actually structure your resume. For example, the resume that paints me as someone who is a software engineer that has actually dabbled a lot in design during my university courses and has built a few design projects, but I really love engineering or working cross-functionally, makes me a pretty interesting candidate for, let's say, working at Figma, a company that is leading the design industry. So now with this fundamental concept in mind, let's move on to one of the biggest mistakes that I see students make with their resume. The first one is that not enough people realize that the resume is actually the first piece of work that they're going to be submitting to the company that's potentially employing them. Your resume is not just some document or some PDF. You could think of it like the first deliverable or the first project that the company sees from you. And the reason I say this is because of the 348 resumes that I reviewed from computer science students, it's kind of remarkable how many of them have just the minorest formatting errors, changes in tense when it doesn't make sense, or different ways of abbreviating the same sort of thing, different font sizes, misspelled words, sort of wacky templates, and the list goes on. If you can't pay attention to these little details in your resume, then why should a company trust you to pay attention to those little details at your job? And this is particularly true for my software engineers out there because code is definitely a pretty meticulous craft, and attention to detail is something that we hopefully have. To write your best resume, you're gonna need to take a step back and put yourself in the recruiter's shoes. The train of thought should look like this. What is it a common truth that I know about a recruiter, and how can I optimize my chances given that truth? So for example, we know that it's true that a recruiter will only spend a couple minutes at most on a given resume. So as a result, we need to make that resume pretty easy to scan. Scannability is something that we should optimize for given this truth. The next thing that we know, a recruiter is not going to get to read every single thing on your resume. That tells us that each line on our resume should add value independently of the greater whole. We want it so that if a recruiter read 5 random bullets on our resume, each one of those bullets would convey context and value. And in this case, we can define providing value as essentially showing why you're a good fit for the role that the recruiter is looking for. The other fundamental truth is that a recruiter's job is to assess their confidence in your ability to do good work. And since this is the first example of work that you're showing them, this truth tells us that in return, we should make sure that everything is well formatted and minor details are paid attention to. And to give you a quick list of what this should look like in terms of actionable steps, let's say the first example of this is, are the tenses in your resume bullets consistent? Are you using past tense in your previous experience, but then present tense in experience before that? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. You should be calculated in the way that you're approaching writing this document. Another thing, have you formatted all of your dates correctly? Where are you choosing to abbreviate? Are you going to abbreviate September as SEPT or SEP? Are you going to add a dot after that abbreviation? Are you going to put 1 hyphen between the 2 months? Or are you going to put 2 hyphens? Are you going to make sure to follow that same format for every single one of the resume experiences? Again, these things may seem small, but in my experience, it's something that I've always paid a lot of attention to And I really have seen the effects of this pay out. Another one is your resume template easy to scan? Is there a clear hierarchy of experiences? Can I quickly identify the company I'm looking for? Or does it just sort of look like one big text compilation where I don't really know where to start? If you're a student watching this, here's some things that you should take as truth. Your resume should be one page. There are going to be 5 main parts to your resume as a student: contact information, education, skills, experience, and any kind of projects or activities. So let's break down each of these 5 parts and go into what are the core things that you should know about each one. First, we have contact info. Keep this simple. Make sure you hyperlink to your socials and your emails, which means that I can just click on your LinkedIn profile and go directly there instead of trying to find you myself. In my opinion, you should avoid using icons next to these. I've always stuck with just making things text-based, and I do think they're a little bit better for some of the ATS systems that I've actually encountered. And some of the things that you should include here are your LinkedIn profile, your name, your email address, your phone number, and I sometimes do see people include things like a photo of themselves. You don't need a photo of yourself. Sometimes people will include their location, like if they're based out of San Francisco or Los Angeles or whatnot. I'd consider that optional. It's not like a bad thing to do, though it's definitely not necessary if that's not something you want to include. Next up, we have the skills section. A big part here is to actually make sure you're categorizing your skills. Don't just write skills and then dump a bunch of skills on. Especially true for big tech employees or software engineers. A good split of what this could look like could be maybe something like programming languages, technologies, and then tools. And the reason I say tools is one of the things that is actually helpful to include on your resume as skills is just examples of some of the day-to-day tools that you might run into on the job that you're applying for. So say I'm applying for Netflix's software engineering internship, I might include information like I know how to use Asana or Jira, or I'm familiar with Confluence for documentation. There is some back and forth on where you should actually go about positioning your experience section. As a student, education should almost always be at the very top, and then skills sort of varies. I've usually positioned it above my experience section, and the rationale there has been that experience is, let's say, a much longer chunk of things to scan over, whereas skills are high impact but also pretty quick to read. And so I prefer to have like more nuggets of knowledge being tossed out to the recruiter. So I usually go like education, skills, and then experience, and then contact information at the very top with my name. So I guess it'll really go contact information, education, skills, experience, and then projects or activities and things like that at the very bottom. And this sort of follows the hierarchical structure of honestly what's most important. Okay, next up we have the experience section. This is your time to shine. I want to introduce something that's really important here, the what, why, how framework. This has honestly been the crucial framework to my success in sort of every single resume that I've built. The what, why, how framework essentially is a structure for what each one of your resume bullets should contain. Every bullet should answer 2 of the 3 questions, and rockstar bullets will answer 3 for 3. So what means that you want your bullet to specify what you did. An example of this could look like, I developed a web application. The how is where you want to detail the methods or the technologies that you use. So I developed a web application was the what, but the how could look like with React and Node.js, for example. Most people will actually stop here. Most resume bullets will look like, I developed a web application using these technologies, but they'll never hit the why. And this is actually one of the second biggest mistakes I see students make, because the why is really where all of the gravy or the value sort of lives. The why is your opportunity to actually convey impact. Why is where you give the reason. Maybe it's to automate some kind of internal process. To tie this all together, let me give you a bullet that I believe hits all 3 of these points and highlight why each one is so crucial. Let's take a bullet that I have written right here in front of me that is personally from my experience at Clever. The bullet reads, developed single sign-on scripts using JavaScript to automate logins for over 22 million monthly users across 10,000 United States school districts. Okay, so what did I do? I developed single sign-on scripts. How did I do it? I did it using JavaScript. Developed single sign-on scripts using JavaScript is a clear depiction of what I did at Clever. But the thing that it lacks is why anyone should care and why the recruiter should care. This is why the why is so important. When you take that and you append on that I developed single sign-on scripts using JavaScript to automate logins for over 22 million users, yada, 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 that portion is where you actually convey the fact that you're somebody who's doing impactful work, you're moving metrics, you're doing things that matter. And people want to hire someone who's doing work that actually matters. So please, 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 if you take any step out of this entire video, It's to really start adding whys into each one of your resume bullets. Finally, we have the education section. Usually it's at the top for students. Doesn't have to be for, let's say, if you're a bootcamp graduate. Sometimes bootcamp grads want to put their education sort of at the very bottom of their resume because it's not really what they're trying to highlight and it's not related to the job that they're applying for. Unless it is, which in that case you should just bring it back up. But here, pretty simple. You want to mention your degree, you want to mention the university. You don't have to mention when you started university. It's pretty common practice to just say when you graduated or your expected graduation date. On top of this, if you are already graduated, you also shouldn't feel super pressured to mention your graduation date if for whatever reason you don't want to include that. But typically, most of the resumes I review will look something like, I went to UCLA, which is like University of California, Los Angeles. I got a bachelor's of administration in computer science and linguistics, and I graduated in June of 2023. If you're recruiting for internships and new grads, definitely make sure you're including that grad date, because that's actually one of the first things that recruiters will look at when they pull up your resume to make sure that you qualify for the role that they're recruiting for. Internships and new grads are pretty interesting there because immediate qualification is grad date and nothing else matters if you don't hit the grad date oftentimes. Cool. The next thing for projects, I actually am someone who ended up having a lot of projects on my resume. I've reviewed this with other people, but my biggest sort of best practice that you should follow here is, again, try to lean in on why the project you made is impactful and not just the fact that you did something. You did something as step one, but the rockstar applicants did something of value, did something of meaning, did something of impact. Lean into that in any of the projects you write, and it'll make each project that you talk about all the more valuable. And finally, if you do have any activities that you want to include, I think things here definitely get a lot looser. One of the ways that I approach this is, before I had a lot of really stellar technical experience, I sort of shied away from including any projects that weren't value aligned to the engineering roles that I was trying to land, because I was really trying to go all in on like adding to my value as an engineer or someone who knows how to code. I did take an interesting lens on this though, of once I started to get a few internships under my belt with larger names, I felt like my credibility in terms of engineering was a little higher, and so I actually wanted to round out my resume a little better by including some other activities, like how I was like on the board of one of the nonprofits in my local city, and things like that. So if you have lots of technical signal already, it could be nice to include this activity section just to round out yourself as a candidate. But if you're still sort of in the stage where you're struggling to convey technical signal, then don't really worry too much about these other activities, because you don't want your resume to look like you're doing a ton of activities not related to engineering or whatever role you're applying for, and then have that be the majority of your resume. All right, some final tips and tricks that I want to leave you with to get a little bit of an extra edge on top of all this. First thing is, instead of just stating tasks, try to quantify whatever achievements you have. Everything looks a lot sexier when you're able to say some sort of metric appended to it, and it's honestly okay to fluff this a little bit or to like estimate it a little bit. Everybody does this, just don't maybe completely make them up out of thin air. So for example, you don't want to say improved website loading speed, you want to say improved website loading speed by 80% or whatever that happened to look like in your case. Next up is using action words. Words like led, developed, initiated, launched, spearheaded, whatever it happens to be. Those words tend to convey subtle, proactive nature, like leadership nature, and it just sort of reads well subconsciously on the resume. But the one bit here is try not to reuse the same action words multiple times. Don't say develop this, develop that, develop this, develop that. Like, as you mix up the action words, it makes it seem like your experience breadth is also longer, wider, because it seems like you've done more things naturally because the word that you're using to explain what you did just changes. Simple psychology hack. I'll include a list of action words in the description below, which will hopefully be helpful to you. Maybe as you're building your resume, you can sort of just like pull them up on the side and sort of just plug some of them in. That's what I did when I was first starting out. All right, so now that you know how to write your best software engineering resume, the next thing I'd explore you to check out is 7 ways to actually go about landing your first internship, or actually just landing whatever your next internship is. These are a lot of ways that you can go about really starting to rack up the experiences you have and building out that experience section on your resume. So check out that video here, and I'll see you in the next one.